All right, everybody, if you could just find your seats. I think I'm technically the moderator for this session, which just means, again, I get to claim credit for a bunch of my teammates' work. I'm really excited to be able to show you a set of our rapid impact use cases, plus a bonus. So in just a moment, my colleague Kunwar Singh is going to tell you about a really cool project in Nepal that we're doing in collaboration with Mercy Corps. And then my colleague Muir is going to talk to you about irrigated rice farming in Bangladesh. And then Kunwar is going to come back up for another project back in West Africa in Niger, looking at soil management there. And then Klaus Deininger, our bonus in this case, is going to talk to you about a really cool case in Ukraine. Just a few words. These rapid impact cases, as I just said, some of the easiest things we hope to do, but of course they turn out to be way harder. We're going to show you a bunch of preliminary results. These are very much works in progress. So if you have great ideas, Kunwar and Carly would love to hear them. There's still lots of work ahead to get these across the finish line. This afternoon, after lunch, we're going to have a chance to see some already completed geospatial impact evaluation work. So you could feel free to take much more pot shots this afternoon and save all your great ideas for this session. So without further ado, Kunwar.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ariel, for introduction, and thank you, everyone, for attending my talk. I will talk about reducing environmental risk through sugarcane cropping in Nepal. This is one of the four. This is one of the four rapid impact use cases we selected within a GeoField project. These projects, they rely on existing impact evaluation and readily available remote sensing data with the intent to produce some initial results within 12 to 18 months period in order to learn fast and adjust go forward approach. I will share with you highlights of the topic, key innovative aspects, methodological workflow, and initial results, just to give you an idea of how we are planning to integrate Earth observation into impact evaluation. My talk is light on methods, so I will be happy to answer any of your questions at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time, we can also chat after the session. Due to anthropogenic activities and climate change, some geographies, as Western Nepal, are prone to severe seasonal floodings, and that puts communities at various environmental and economic risk. MRAD program over the past several years has trained and encouraged farmers to plant water-intensive crops along river banks of Western Nepal to combat some environmental risks such as soil erosion, river cutting, and severe flooding. MRAD program stands for Managing Risk Through Economic Development, which is funded by Margaret A. Cargill Foundation and implemented by Mercy Corps in four different phases. Addressing these risks require community-level actions that may include disaster preparedness and structural mitigation. However, challenges associated with collective action can hamper the take-up of these strategies. There are multiple other solutions. One of the solutions is that involves payment for ecosystem services that requires transferring resources from impacted communities to those protecting ecosystem services. Another solution involves identifying new productive activities such as planting water-intensive sugarcane crop along river banks, which helps to generate economic growth and also reduces environmental risk. The approach adopted in MRAD program is known as Nexus approach. The key to the Nexus approach is market system development of agricultural communities that have economic growth, income earning potential, while also supporting climate adaptation and disaster preparedness. This approach has been embedded in MRAD program in the western part of Nepal since 2013. Communities in these regions are comprised of marginalized groups and ethnic minorities that derive their livelihood from smallholder farming. If you see graph on the right-hand side, you will see uptake of sugarcane farming between 2014 to 2021. It has multifold uptake, which is visible from 76 hectare to all the way to 937. During the same time, total protected area increased almost 35, means 100 hectares. Now, following the flood in August 2017 in central and western Nepal, MRAD conducted a quasi-experimental impact evaluation, which found that MRAD Nexus participants demonstrated improved resilience to the flooding event compared to non-MRAD households. Finding also suggests that communities with MRAD program had more than 15% disaster risk reduction than those without MRAD program, which also increased their confidence, reaching up to 22% of their ability to cope with future climate shocks and stresses. Community with MRAD program shows 20% higher rate of access to savings, and at the same time, twice more probability to have received early warning. And performance evaluation data also suggests increased confidence in ability to respond and recover from shocks, improved strategies, increased ability to resume income generation post-disaster, and reduce migration to find work. And the most importantly, more than 3 times increase in average household in sugarcane revenue. Evaluation of MRAD program has shown adoption of promoted crops and practices that has been strong, however, far from uniform. Likewise, program's broader environmental impact has not yet been assessed. Thus, identifying the full effect of program on environmental conditions remain vital. And there are questions that we are yet to be answered are, what are the geographical distribution and the adoption rate of sugarcane and fodder crops for livestock feed during the pre and post MRAD program? Hereafter, I will talk about only sugarcane because mapping framework for sugarcane and fodder crops are the same. And the next question is, what are the effects of MRAD intervention on soil erosion and river cutting? 3 key challenges need to be addressed to answer the first question. The first is understanding the pattern of sugarcane crop. Second, develop ground observation for each year to train and validate classification algorithm for mapping sugarcane. And finally, developing an analytical framework that ensures methods and findings are replicable in different environmental for their uptake in the future. So sugarcane is a tall perennial grass with a long growing season. It takes between 270 to 360 days and grows more than 2 meter tall. Farmer in this region plant sugarcane in spring between January and February and harvest in autumn between September and October. To understand the growth of sugarcane crop and their variation from other seasonal crops, we developed phenology, which is the timing of life cycle events of crop from sowing to harvest. We use sentinel imagery-derived NDVI at farm scale to create sugarcane phenology to identify the peak growing season and maturity, which is often in September and October. The graph you see here is basically phenology of sugarcane at farm scale. We took few farms and we developed this phenology, where what is happening is here is that the early period, the first few months is basically shows a gradual green up and vegetative growth. The maturity phase is a little bit longer, followed by a sudden decline due to harvest. So here's the innovative ideas what we have introduced here. In any geospatial impact evaluation, ground observation is the key. And sometimes we have for a year or two. The same is happening here. We have field ground observation data for 2016. So question is that how we can go back in time and after also years ahead. And we decided to use something very innovative, and that is we call cluster analysis. So this cluster analysis is a type of data analysis techniques that explores similarities between different data points and pairing them under the same group. The time series cluster have similar values, stays in proportion, display different pattern across time. Here we use sugarcane phenologies of known forms to group the phenology of unknown forms into sugarcane, fodder crops, and other vegetation type. So this is an example what we displayed. If you see the figure on the right, you will see that is matching with the second box from left. So this helped us to use actual ground observation to go back in time and identify some forms, they are actual sugarcane crop using their phenology. Because that sugarcane phenology is totally different than any other seasonal crop, which is like 3 months or maximum 5 months long. We also use this phenology approach to do the mapping. In order to make it more practical and user-friendly approach, we decided to use Google Earth Engine, where we automated the entire process. The field data we created using actual 2016 field data, we plugged into for each year for mapping. Because this is in developmental phase, so we have just used 4 classes just to showcase you how we are mapping this process from here we have displaying from between 2015 to 2020, but we can go as far as back we want and also up to recent. To do this sugarcane mapping, we use both actual and newly developed ground observation, along with we use random forest classification technique and sentinel data to do this mapping part. Now, to assess broader environmental impacts such as river cutting, we relied on river sifting from year to year. As a proof of concept, we implemented our river cutting in one community of Western Nepal where MRAD was rolled out. We used high-resolution imagery available via Google Earth Map to trace rivers' path in each year, and then compare the distance in its path between one year and the next. This allowed us to document or count the incidents of river cutting. We plan to expand this methodology across the study area, across all rivers. So if you see here, there's a different years from 2008 all the way up to 2020. You will see that how river is shifting from year to year, and that also gives an indication how this approach we can utilize in a simple way, a more effective way to identify river shifting and also river cutting incidents. The next effort we implemented in this is soil erosion modeling. We decided to utilize, the first approach we have used so far is that universal soil loss equation. And again, we automated using Google Earth Engine from all the way back from 2013 to 2020. And the map you see is based on 2019. This again showcase how we can use this universal soil loss equation in Google Earth Engine to develop this annual soil loss map. And on the right, the graph you see, it shows that soil loss between 2013 to 2019. something is very interesting here. It declines between 2013 to 2015, and then it goes up. It peaks in 2017. And that is the year when it flooded, flooding happened in central and western part of Nepal. Again, this is its initial results. There's no confidence that how accurate they are, but thing is that we wanted to have a draft working methodological workflow that we can improve and develop further before we produce outcome that we can plug into real geospatial impact evaluation. To sum up, the effort we took, different approaches, we wanted to answer these two questions. What are the geographical distribution and the adoption rate of sugarcane? And the second one is what are the effect of MRAD intervention on environmental risk? Entire effort will help us to get sugarcane and soil erosion map for each year, and also scripts and tools that we can disseminate and distribute. And also all the outcomes we will have for each year, we will plug into our geospatial impact evaluation to assess how MRAD intervention has affected that western part of Nepal, both economically as well as improving some fighting against this environmental risks like soil erosion and river cutting. Last but not least, I would like to acknowledge faculty and researchers and students involved in these studies, especially Mercy Corps MRAD Nepal team and the community they are working in. Without their hard work, I doubt if we could have done anything, we would have anything to evaluate. So thank you.
We have time for a few questions for Kunwar.
Yes.
Thank you. I had a quick question. Do you mind going back to the slide where you showed the random forest labels of the terrain? Are there no roads in this region, or like why don't we see sort of like lines of bare terrain where there are roads and infrastructure?
There's only 4 classes. It's developmental phase. Our effort has been to first have a methodological workflow that is functional and then do further improvement. So what you said, we will have multiple classes, multiple vegetation types. Right now, we decided to use 4 classes to keep it simple and make it till we have fully functional script. So that's the reason. And random forest classification is nothing new. It has been implemented so many times. So effort is that just have something that's working across the year, giving us suitable, justifiable results that we can plug into our GIs confidently.
Thank you.
Hello. I have a question here.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much for the wonderful the talk which you have given, and the impact which you have shown is really wonderful. I believe that there are quite similarity between the Nepal ecological conditions and the Indian ecological conditions, and the sugarcane has been main crop of India. I believe that there would be many learning from the farmers of India, because they are very innovative while they are raising the sugarcane crop, and they are not only experimenting as to what the best dates would be of the plantation, but they are also innovating as to what would be the intercrop of the sugarcane, because they are harvesting with sugarcane at least 2 more crops. And this is not only helping them to attain financial stability, but also these are acting as the cover crop. And I believe the cover crop would be very, very important when you are using any agriculture practice to have less degradation of the soil or less erosion of the soil. So cover crop would be very, very important. So this is my suggestion, that there would be great learning from the Indian farmers, especially in context of the sugarcane cultivation. Thank you very much for wonderful talk which you have delivered.
Thank you, Ajit, for saying that thing. And that is the reason we have invited all of you, and you are the expert in sugarcane for breeding and many other activities in northern part of India. So certainly we are looking forward to learning from your perspective and how we can weave them in this project to have a holistic view, make it more representable, because sugarcane is not happening in Nepal, but also on the other side of India, which is the huge sugarcane belt in Tarai region. So yeah, thank you.
I think mine is somewhat related, and it's a very good presentation.
Excuse me, would you please tell your name and?
Oh, my name is David Ameya from ICE, International Center for Evaluation and Development.
Okay.
You know, the presentation is great. I'm sitting down here, you know, thinking about it and putting myself in the shoes of maybe a farmer in Nepal and relating to what he's saying. My thinking is that how are we using these you know, images to engage the farmer so that maybe their farming practices can be changed, or maybe they can modify what they do in order to mitigate against some of these you know, incidents that are happening. You know, how are we going to do that? You know, that's what I'm sitting down here looking at it. And the powerful tool that we have, you know, yes.
This is a very important point you brought up, and I think I will let Brad answer because he has more in-depth knowledge. Because we have a Mercy Emerald team in Nepal, but how they are connected with the farmers there, that information, I think you are in position to provide that, Brad.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. Brad Segarra from Mercy Corps. It is such an important question, and it's something that some of these results, this is the first time I'm seeing them, and I'm thinking similar thoughts as you, David, of how can we share this information with our MRED team who is continuing to implement in these areas. And I think exactly like you said, I think there's going to be a lot of learning that can come out of this that's going to be important for them. And I will also say, and I think this is kind of related to your comment as well in terms of intercropping and other, like how we're other farming practices. And I think one of the exciting things about MRED is we're starting to see people kind of in communities where MRED is not working, they're looking at what's happening in our MRED supported communities and kind of taking this sugarcane plantation up on their own terms. And so this is why we wanted to look at what is the geographical distribution. So I think there's a lot of like community level applications of this research, but then general policy level that we can work with the government of Nepal as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you very much. My name is Petronella Halwindi with Farm Africa, and I'm really excited to see this level of measurement happening. We, as Farm Africa, are implementing or have been implementing for a long time now, a participatory landscape management program in Ethiopia, looking at the Eco Valley region, the whole landscape. And we have pretty much used a similar model where we're integrating a market systems-based approach to managing resources. It's really about conserving ecosystems for the benefit of smallholder farmers so that we can increase the ecosystem services provided for different enterprises in the forests. So it's a whole landscape approach, and we're looking at rivers, we're looking at dams, we're looking at forests, and we're looking at general farmland. And just looking at this, I'm like, oh my God, we've been implementing this work for the last 10 years, and we continue to implement this huge program in the Eco Valley region. And it would be great if we can really take this series information and see how that work has impacted not only the earth and the ecosystems, but the people's well-being as well. So I'm really excited to see this, and I would be thinking about collaborating to see how we can better measure the impact of all of that work for this long time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Amisu Samari from Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC. I just have one quick question for clarification on this mapping. Can you confirm that the images are taken around the same time of the year every single year, across the whole year?
Can you repeat again?
Yeah, for those maps, are they taken around the same time of the year, or are there like a compilation of multiple views across the year?
Yes, that's a great question. Just to answer your question, we are making an effort to do mapping before harvesting, either after harvesting, because there's a certain time period when they do harvesting, and that's the time period when everything is more visible. So during the month of September, and means September is also, I think, monsoon season just calms down a little bit. I think so. After that period, it's a little better. There is more opportunities for clear images. So between September and October, that is the period. So yeah, so that we have put in, we have made that specification in the programming.
I see. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Kunwar?
Yeah.
I think we're out of time.
Sure.
So if you have, is there one last question?
There's 2 hands I saw, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Again, very useful presentation, and incredibly, useful insights into this particular project evaluation. One thing that I was really interested to know from you, that if you can summarize that, had we not used this geospatial technology as a part of this impact assessment, what would have been, the implications for the evaluation? Or what are the kind of benefits that you brought in while using this particular tools as a part of the traditional evaluations that we do, like here in this case, Kausai experimental design that you have used, and generally we go for surveys of the different treatment group and the comparison group. So I would be really interested, because one thing that I have been thinking is that some of the environmental indicators that you have used, for example, river erosion. I think this is general problem across South Asia, and what kind of impact it has on the soil or other impacts that you are looking because of the climate change. When we see this year or in, let's say, few years' time, a lot of stability in that particular river, but all of a sudden then there are changes and huge, erosion happens. So how we ensure sustainability aspects of the project? So these were a few questions. Thank you.
I think that's it will take a little bit longer, so perhaps we can talk about this after the end of the session. So, but that's a great question, and I will love to engage with you on this topic. But we can do this after this session. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks again, Kunwar. So from Nepal, we're going to go to Bangladesh and Carly Muir.
While we're waiting for slides to get pulled up, I just want to mention there are headphones, headset underneath each desk in case you're having trouble hearing, but I will try to stand close to them. Okay. There are headsets underneath the tables if you're having trouble hearing, but I will try to stick close to the microphone. All right. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Carly Muir. I'm here from AidData, where I'm a geospatial analyst. And today I'm going to be talking about our work, which aims to detect water conservation practices for irrigation of rice farming in Bangladesh. Before I jump into the use case, I want to give some background on rice production. I know we have many people that are knowledgeable on rice farming, rice production, but for those of you that are not, like I was prior to starting this research, this may be helpful. As I've been conducting this work, one thing that has come up is this idea that rice is the most important food crop, and I will say that I'm starting to believe that this is in fact true. So rice is a staple food crop for 3.5 billion people, and it's income for over 200 million smallholder farmers. Another thing that I've read is a quote stating that irrigation represents one of the most impactful human interventions in the terrestrial water cycle, and I would argue in Earth's system. So being a geographer that studies human-environment interaction, this struck a chord with me and emphasized the importance of this work and all work surrounding rice production. In particular, because what we expect is that there will be water scarcity for rice crops throughout parts of Asia by 2025, and that's both physical and economic water scarcity. So again, really important work being done in this field. In terms of production and consumption, of course, there was an increase in production in the mid-1900s through the end of that century. However, since then, the increase in production has stalled largely due to land degradation, so facing some issues there. However, what we see in terms of consumption is that that is increasing predominantly in the global south with an increase of about 1.5% annually. However, that production, again, is stalled at 1% annually. So certainly, we need to increase the production of rice, but we have to do so sustainably, in particular because rice does have a global impact, the production of rice. So it is impacting global warming. It is also affected by global warming or climate change, in that it's responsible for a lot of emissions of nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, and namely methane. However, there are some options to reduce this effect. One, which I'll talk about today, alternate wetting and drying, which is in this category of non-continuous flooding, which can potentially be adopted by 76% of global rice harvested areas and would have major reductions in the emissions of greenhouse gases like methane if it were to be adopted. So jumping into the use case then. This is based on work from Kyle Emmerich and his team. He's based at Tufts University in Boston, and this was published back in 2022. The goal of that work was to examine the effectiveness of different strategies for subsidizing alternate wetting and drying in Bangladesh. So the goal of AWD is that we will reduce the total water consumption without seeing declines in yield. And this has been studied and proven across different regions. Numbers vary depending on region in terms of how much reduction in irrigation water takes place, but generally around 30%. So the way that AWD works is there's a plastic pipe, sometimes bamboo is used as well, other materials, and this pipe has holes in the lower half. This is then placed into the ground 15 to 20 centimeters, and it allows the farmers to observe the subsurface water level. And so by doing this, they can see how much water is still available to the crops without having to flood the fields, once that water is below the surface. So there's some timing to this. So in the first 1 to 2 weeks after transplanting, there is shallow flooding that takes place. And then again, from the heading to the end of flowering, when the rice crop is vulnerable, there's flooding during that time. But in between that, it's going to be alternating flooding and not flooding, reflooding the field whenever the perch water table reaches 15 centimeters below the surface, so then the flooding will take place again to about 5 centimeters. I do want to point out that this is highly dependent on the location and the soil type at that location. Jumping into the use case then. So there's two different randomized control trials with this work. The first one was across 400 villages during the dry season, split across 3 different divisions in Bangladesh. There were 200 treatment villages that were provided AWD, including training sessions and installation of the pipe and put close to the tube wells, and then 200 control villages. Now, in terms of gathering data, there were surveys that were taken, but the data we're more interested in when it comes to implementing or integrating Earth observation is the measurements that were taken at each field in terms of how much water was present on the field. So you can see this graphic is showing you the growing season. So AWD was installed in the first 10 days, and then the rest of the growing season was split in half, and there were randomly assigned days to go to the villages, 2 days throughout the growing season, and take measurements in the field of how much water was present. Results from this first RCT. So the graphs here are showing you the top one is the amount of water in the field, and the line graph below that is the field, the dryness in the field. So what we see is that there is in fact a difference between the treatment and control. So there is less water present within the first 60 or 70 days of the treatment sites, which is what we would expect. However, I will point out that this is different based on whether the farmers were paying for irrigation with a volumetric price versus a fixed price. With the volumetric price, they have more incentive to conserve that water, to use the AWD. So then, and just pointing out, then after that 60, 70 day mark, that's when the flowering takes place, and so the flooding is needed because it is in that, the rice is in that vulnerable stage. Okay, so then moving on to the second randomized control trial, and this is the one that we've worked more closely with in terms of the data that's come out of it and integrating the Earth observation into that. So this RCT was conducted across 2 districts. It included 360 villages with more than 19,000 plots, and these plots are all within 449 command areas. This is an example of what I mean when I say command areas. So these are plots shown in white there, and then the command area is outlined in green. And so all of these plots are receiving water from the same tube well. There were 3 different strategies used for subsidizing the AWD. They were sold directly to the well owners, door to door to farmers, or in village meetings, and then of course we had the control group. Data was collected in 2018. That was a baseline survey going over things like initial productivity and management, and then follow-up surveys were done in 2019 and 2020. Importantly, the piece of data that we're most interested in here is the electricity consumption. This is used as a proxy for water consumption, the water that's being pumped up from that tube well. And so measures were taken, meters were read at the beginning of the growing season and at the end of the growing season, and this was used to estimate daily electricity to use for water consumption. The results of this second RCT, 2 important things to note. First, that the number of pipes that were used were similar across the different treatments, regardless of how many were actually sold. So the technology was applied to three or four plots or 3 or 4 farmers. And then more interesting is the electricity consumption. So there were insignificant results in year 1, and this may be explained by hesitancy to take up AWD. But in year 2 in 2020, what economists saw is that there was significantly less electricity consumption, and we would expect water consumption in treatments where AWD was offered through village meetings and to the well owners. That's what you see on the graph here, showing you the daily electricity use and then the treatment effects on the right. All right, moving into opportunities for integrating geospatial data. So the goal of this use case is to assess the possibility of identifying alternate wetting and drying with Earth observation geospatial techniques. So the estimation of AWD is difficult for a number of reasons. Farmers may not fully adopt AWD, or they may not adopt it at all. The adoption is dependent on things like the season that they're growing in, general water availability, access to irrigation water, and then also whether or not the farmer has a membership to a group irrigation district. And so with all of these complexities, in order to obtain an accurate measure of where AWD is being adopted, that would require surveys to be sent out or to be conducted on an annual basis, if not a seasonal basis. So obviously very costly, very time consuming. And this creates potential for geospatial techniques to improve the estimation of AWD adoption. However, there have been limited studies that attempt to use geospatial techniques for this. I'll note one in particular is from Lovell in 2019, and they used Sentinel-1 data with in situ soil and moisture data. So this was a nice study. The map here is showing you the probability of a field adopting AWD. However, the limitations being that in order to use that Sentinel-1 imagery, that it does take a lot of processing and time. And then secondly, there is that in situ soil moisture data, and of course, not everywhere has those meters to get that information. Looking at the potential then of geospatial techniques to identify AWD, there's of course benefits. We see consistent measurements across space and time through satellite imagery, improved observation frequency, so we can look retrospectively as well as having more observations in the future, and then it is going to be more cost effective. However, there are also challenges and considerations that we have to look at. The first is that majority of rice production is done through smallholder farms, and so spatial resolution is key. This is something that we've come across in our preliminary analysis, and is certainly a big factor that we'll pay attention to moving forward. The next is the satellite return period. Again, another issue that we've run into as we've looked at different data sources. So AWD is a time, observing AWD is a time-sensitive issue. When is the flooding taking place and whatnot? So the satellite return period can be a critical factor. And then lastly, another challenge is weather conditions. So if we're using a radar sensor, then weather conditions won't be an issue. However, using something like Landsat or MODIS, certainly trying to observe something when there are clouds, it's not going to be possible. What we've done so far in terms of integrating the Earth observation is to look at evapotranspiration. So the anticipated approach is that we'll use a time series analysis of evapotranspiration and soil moisture. So remotely sensed data is used for what we call surface energy balance models, or SEB models. And this is an estimate of energy fluxes at Earth's surface based on the energy balance. And you can see a modified version of that to get our evapotranspiration down in the bottom left. So the hypothesis here being that fields that have adopted AWD will have distinct temporal trends in evapotranspiration because there's going to be there will be greater availability in the ET, and also we should see a decline since there is less water available at the surface to be evaporated. So as I've said, we've looked at a few data sources or data products in this preliminary work. The table down here is showing you the three primary sources. I'll go over them quickly. So the first is EE-Flux. This is a product based on the metric SEB model. There are, of course, limitations and some positive aspects to each of these. When it comes to EE-Flux, the biggest limitation is the temporal scale. So it's using Landsat, which is bi-weekly observations. The spatial resolution is decent, 30-meter pixel resolution. However, it has that limited temporal scale has been an issue. Additionally, it is more of it's an inflexible data product, so you can't plug something else in other than Landsat. It is a product that it's served to us ready to go, which is great in some ways, but can also present challenges. The next is the Siebel improved Google Earth Engine model. So this is the Siebel SEB model. This is also at a 30-meter pixel resolution, and it is providing evapotranspiration at a monthly total. So it is adjustable in that the code is available for folks to pick up and use and adjust as they need. Very user-friendly. However, it has some limitations, and well, primarily that right now it's a monthly total. And again, as I said, AWD is time sensitive. We want to see that variability, and that might be difficult to see if we're using monthly totals. The next model, the last model on here, is the TSEB model. TSEB is, I believe, has the most potential. It is more flexible in terms of the input data that you want to use, and what that will result in different temporal or spatial scales. However, it does require a lot of input data, and so that aspect of it is quite time consuming. So I'll point out here really quick, this is showing you the monthly evapotranspiration at one of the command areas from Siebel, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So the dashed lines are the plots in that command area. Again, showing you that resolution is really important. This is 30 meters. The other thing I want to point out about these models is that the first two are single source SEB models. This means that they are estimating evapotranspiration as a single metric, versus the TSEB model, which is a two source SEB model. So that provides the transpiration and the evaporation, the soil evaporation separately. And this is probably, we expect, going to be an important factor in analyzing this data. This is some of the preliminary data exploration. So the top graph there, this is based on MODIS 500-meter resolution. The top graph is showing you vegetation transpiration at a treatment site in yellow and a green site, or a control site in green. And so again, what we would expect to see, given that there is less water available at the AWD sites, is that there would be greater transpiration at the control site. However, for 2019 and 2020, that is not what we see. So the results have been a bit counterintuitive, and that extends as well into the soil evaporation. This other graph is showing you the total soil evaporation across the season for the different treatment sites where those different subsidies were implemented, and then the control site in yellow. So there is some nice distinction in the year 2019 in terms of how much soil evaporation took place over the growing season. However, again, what we're seeing is greater soil evaporation at the AWD sites versus the control. This is what we see with Siebel as well as the EE-Flux data, and so not necessarily what we would have expected. The last thing that I want to mention that I'm excited to implement is a data set from Planet. So this is high resolution data. It's a product that is the soil water content data. What it's showing is the water content of the top 5 centimeters of the soil, and it's based on passive and micro radiation, so using a number of sensors. So it's a downscaled product from initial observations that were taken at several kilometers from SMAP, AMSRE, Sentinel, you can see up there. And what we intend to use is the 100-meter resolution product. It is also available at 1 kilometer, and it also maintains a decent temporal coverage as well, with about 200 images per year, depending on location. So very excited to integrate this as well, hopefully get some good results looking at soil moisture. So next steps for this work, certainly determination of the best data set to use for soil moisture or for evapotranspiration. Again, I believe the TSEB will give us the best results because it is a two-source model. We can get soil evaporation and transpiration separately. As I just mentioned, that Planet Soil Moisture product I'm hoping will be very informative. But we're also looking at other additional Earth observation variables, things like the normalized difference water vegetation index, normalized difference water index. We also hope to devise a methodological approach that will incorporate the data from that first RCT. So looking at the amount of water that was present on the fields when the surveyors went out and took measurements. But ultimately, the goal of this is to try to identify farms that have adopted AWD with a time series analysis. All right, with that, I'm happy to take questions. I saw your name.
Hi, I'm Alice Laborte from the International Rice Research Institute. So I'm very much interested in your presentation, also because being able to detect AWD using Earth observation would be useful also for carbon credits assessments. What we found the theory is that you can only do AWD when you can control irrigation. So maybe that could be a layer that could be introduced also aside from just EO. And what we also know is that when the canopy closes, then it's really hard to see whether you're practicing EO or not. So I'm interested, like, if you can really detect it with evapotranspiration. And also we talk about safe AWD. So you're not really stressing the plant too much. So with the evapotranspiration, you have to also be careful about that, because if you're stressing the plant, that's not AWD. You're not really practicing the AWD enough, no? And at Erie, we also have these sensors. They're called Automon. So it's tested in a few sites in the Philippines where they actually measure and they're sensors that are going to the irrigation system to signal that, okay, it's time now to irrigate in this particular area. So maybe there is scope to look at those data sets and Earth observation to see if we can really detect AWD and how we can develop a methodology for it.
Yeah, that would be certainly interesting to I think it's so much in the early stages that soil moisture data might be important for really understanding how accurately we can use Earth observation before scaling that up to regions that don't have soil moisture data available. Thank you. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that comment, another one of our investments called AgResults had a project in Vietnam on AWD where they actually did try to measure greenhouse gas emissions. They weren't real successful in that domain. They had estimated 30% reduction. Their best guess estimates with the measurements that they were taking was somewhere between 3 and 10%. So it's an area that still really needs some research. But there's a follow-on, not through AgResults, but I think through the government of Vietnam perhaps, but there's a big expansion of AWD in the Mekong Delta. And there is a remote sensing component for the validation or the verification of the AWD. So it might be interesting to check to see who's doing, I can follow up and check to see who's doing that work and what's involved. And just, I've heard Kyle talk about his work there. And was there an issue with water pricing? So I think if water basically is priced evenly across fields so that it's not dependent on any one farmer's use, then there's not a lot of incentive for AWD because there is more labor, right? So was that a factor in this study?
So certainly in the first RCT, those graphs were showing it was separated, the treatment groups were separated by those that are paying for the volumetric price of water versus just a standard price. I believe in the second RCT, it was a standard price across all the farms. If I'm remembering correctly from Kyle's work, yeah.
Thank you very much, number one, for the nice talk which you have delivered and the nice approach which you have used in your project. AWD seems to be a very promising technology as far as reduction in greenhouse gases is concerned and the reduction in water use is concerned. But then there are certain issues, there are certain misconceptions which need to understand. Number one is that when we are using AWD, there would be reduction in methane gas, but at the same time, because there is trade-off between methane emission and nitrous oxide, so there would be possibility of rising nitrous oxide emission from the same field. So we really need to look at as to what is happening. And just to keep it at the minimum level, there are certain management practices which are available, the different scientists working in the different areas, those have developed, because the nitrous oxide, when we talk about it, mainly depends on the application of the nitrogenous fertilizers and in what way it is being applied, when it is being applied, and how much it is being applied. Those are very, very important. So my suggestion would be when we are doing certain studies, we should keep an eye on as to what is happening with the emissions. Number two is AWD is mostly targeted to reduction and to the water uses. So when we are targeting it, we should keep in mind that most of these regions from where the data has been collected, like Bangladesh, India, and all other adjoining regions, mostly the rice crop is grown in rain-fed region. And there would be only few instances when the irrigation would be applied. So we really need to look at as to how much irrigation really we are saving, because there would always be, if we are collecting this information from the farmers, there would be a possibility that the data which is coming to us will not be the accurate one. Water which is applied into the rice field is basically for controlling the weeds. It is not for supporting the growth of the crop. So if we are suggesting AWD, we also need to suggest them as to what would be the strategy for controlling the weeds into the field. Otherwise, we will end up with some kind of erroneous result where there would be kind of greenness which would be detected by the different sensors, but then the productivity will not be exactly the same which we intended to have. So these are the two suggestions which need to be incorporated when we are doing such studies. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Two things that, firstly, I should have mentioned that this study is specifically focused on the Boro season, which is the dry season. So I'm not sure how much rainfall is a factor there, but certainly irrigation is from what I understand, the primary groundwater is the primary source of irrigation. The other thing you raised is more of the, I think, agronomic effects that take place when the AWD is implemented. So agronomy is not my background, but I think that speaks to the need for interdisciplinary work, not only just with issues of weeds and how that might impact things like evapotranspiration or other measurements we see and DVI from the satellites, but also things like leaf area index. How does non-continuous flooding affect leaf area index, and what does that mean for evapotranspiration? So excellent point. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Tulika Narayan with Mathematica. I was very excited when you said you'll use evapotranspiration to look at adoption, and then your results were very surprising. So I was just curious whether you considered the actual adoption, because what Richard was mentioning, the AgResult study, and I was involved in setting up the RCT there, and one of the early findings that we found was the difficulty in adoption of AWD, and I think the comments earlier also are talking about how difficult it is to adopt that approach, because it's a long tradition to flood the fields, and it's very sort of tempting to do that. So I just wanted to get a sense of whether the difference between treatment and control is just coming because you're choosing the treatment based on the programmatic definition versus an actual adoption of the technology. Yeah. And the other piece also, which was also mentioned, where you can control the irrigation or not, and it seems like in Mekong there is irrigation already happening, but even so, the flooding patterns often reflect the rainfall season. So I wonder if generally there is more water around, and whether that affects the measurement of evapotranspiration so that you're not able to really detect the differences across the field. So I don't know how precise this measurement is, and if those two factors are affecting why you are so close between the two.
Yeah, great points. So to answer your first question, it is the programmatic in terms of distinguishing. I am not sure if in the survey data there is that information available, but certainly that would be very helpful to know.
You'd be very surprised how little adoption can actually happen then in that case.
Yeah. And then the other question regarding precipitation, so that is also part of the next steps, is to understand how can we incorporate precipitation, temperature, other factors that are going to affect evapotranspiration, how can we include that to better understand the whole dynamic between AWD and AT. Yeah. Good.
Yes, thanks. Really good question. We're ready to move on to the next talk. So water conservation and then water conservation and now DJ.
Hello again. I'll try to be quick because we have a very limited time. So in dry lands, when irrigation is not viable, water availability is scarce. Rainwater harvesting techniques present powerful options for improving agricultural productivity. This study is about measuring rainwater harvesting techniques adoption in Niger using Earth observation data.
Kunwarji, we cannot hear you.
Okay. So is that okay now? Okay. So in Niger, growing population and food demands has led to farming on unproductive land. This agricultural intensification, along with erratic rainfall patterns, contribute to land degradation, leaving farmers more exposed to weather shocks. To overcome this issue, climate adoption requires agricultural practices that increases level and duration of water retention within soil and also replenishes soil with nutrient. Demi-lunes and jai are excellent examples. Demi-lunes are semi-holes on the ground with 3 to 5 meter diameters filled with the manure, and demi-lunes are oriented against the slope of the ground, so they can capture rainwater running downhill. Research also suggests that demi-lune can significantly reduce soil erosion, lower the risk of crop failure, and also increase profits. Yet their adoption remains very low. So Professor Jenny Ecker from Truffett University and Kelsey Jack from University of California, Santa Barbara, they conducted a randomized controlled trial at the village level to test the importance of different barriers to demi-lune adoption. Farmers from 160 villages were assigned to one of 4 treatments. Training only treatments was meant to address information constraint. Few farmers from each village received half-day training where they were given a specification how to build and construct demi-lunes, and also they were given a booklet. Second, training plus early unconditional cash transfer intervention. That was meant to address liquidity constraint. Farmers were given training, and also they were given, they were given unconditional cash transfer of $20 before Demillion was constructed. Third set of treatment was farmers given training plus conditional cash transfer treatment, where farmers received 40 cents per demillion paid at the start of the rainy season and after verifying number of demillions constructed. Fourth treatment was that farmers, they received training plus late unconditional cash transfer. And fourth one is basically combination of second and third, which differs in their modality and timing. And the last one is control, where farmers they receive no training and no cash transfer. Data were collected at household surveys before and after the program in 2018, 2019, and 2021. Observational data on demillion construction in June each year from 2018 to 2021, where census taker counted number of demillions and their specification in the sense their diameter, their depth, and many other, and spacing as well. In 2020, census taker visited all the fields and took their coordinates, just to ensure that the way they are doing survey, they are consistent. Finding of this study suggests that 4% of households on controlled villages adopted demillions, whereas farmers in treated villages were 91% more likely to adopt. There were no significant difference between the treatments, but slightly higher adoption rate for each cash transfer treatments. However, by the end of third year, that means in 2020, all treatment adoption rate merged, meaning training had a persistent effect on adoption than cash transfer. There could be many reasons. There were some of them for this high adoption rate was like demillions were privately profitable. There weren't direct competition with other agricultural labor demands. There were a few other substitute for recuperating severely degraded soil in easier. A study also rules out the idea that liquidity constraints are persistent barrier to adoption. However, to expand adoption of demillion, explore whether large training which are cheaper to implement deliver similar adoption, and to assess the relative costs and benefits of using in-person versus remote sensing to monitor initial and sustained adoptions. We need to know their presence, their spillover, and land suitable to further their adoption. Now, the question is how to utilize Earth observation to measure adoption across village, soil quality, vegetation cover, and agricultural outcomes. There are multiple challenges that requires innovative approach to combine Earth observation into demillion adoption. First challenge is size of demillions is many more times smaller than the spatial resolution of freely available satellite data. For example, Sentinel, Landsat and Sentinel. Their spatial resolution ranges between 10 and 30 meters. That makes them ineffective. Detection based on visual analysis of high-resolution imagery is cost prohibitive, and particularly requires personnel who is expert in visual interpretation techniques. And second is, in this region, the time of year when some visual indications of adoptions are most obvious is also most susceptible to cloud cover. Finally, lack of land suitability data. The success of demillion adoption depends on soil properties, seasonal moisture, and topographic properties such as slope and aspect. For example, slope creates microclimates that farmers can use in their advantages when growing plant. The downside of slope is that it can be difficult to establish planting bed and is more prone to soil erosion than that of its flat surface. Water has a natural tendency to collect at the bottom of slope while the top remains drier. But this can also be depending on the overall topography of the entire area. In general, a steeper slope and south-facing aspects tend to have more vegetation compared to flat slopes, and north-facing aspects tend to compared to that. There are many other factors that can affect water harvesting in dry lands. However, there is an issue, and that is there's no such data that can help farmers to decide where to construct demillions. To overcome this challenge, we needed to know land suitable for demillion construction that later can be utilized for detection and to predicting presence of demillion using Earth observation data. That can extend the time over which adoption is observed, expanding the samples to cover new adoptions that occur. We used 3 different approaches: multi-criteria decision analysis, in which method treats every criteria equally, then weighted linear combination that assigns weight to each criteria and combines those weight. And the third one is this random forest regression analysis, where demillion either identified visually or collected through ground observations are used as a dependent variable. We are currently experimenting with binary and also continuous variable. Binary means presence and absence of demillions, and continuous where we utilized cumulative soil moisture within those demillion area to run random forest regression analysis. In the figure, what you see here, we have developed various inputs like digital elevation model derived like slope aspect, soil types, distance from villages, land use, land cover, and cumulative soil moisture. Use of cumulative soil moisture is something very intuitive here. We can update whenever we have new satellite data, and we can improve our land suitability model. The figure here you see is an outcome of random forest regression using continuous variable, where blue color represents more suitable, means area land suitable for, highly suitable for demillion construction. The next challenge that we are working is detecting demillion using sentinel and planetoscope imagery. The graph you see on the left-hand side, that is a monthly climatology of minimum temperature, mean temperature, maximum temperature, and precipitation from 1991 to 2020. If you see the graph on the right-hand side, you will see similarity. And on the right-hand side, the graph is NDVI, time series NDVI for few selected demillions. And you will see that it's following the pattern of precipitation. We used some of these out as input, like NDVI, soil moisture, and whatever we could derive from Earth observation, we plugged into this demillion detection method. We used 2 approaches, semi-automated and automated. In semi-automated, we use segmentation method. In automated approach, we used we call GLCM, gray level co-occurrence matrix, and machine learning approach. We have, this is the initial set of outcomes, not fully satisfactory, but still it gives an indication how best we can utilize. And the data we use with, in this detection is demillion, planetoscope, which is approximately 3 meters in spatial resolution. To sum up this work, means the effort we have taken, it can address 2 aspects: land suitability model, and then detection of demillion in the RCT areas, and also to identify their presence in neighboring areas. And as we mentioned in the previous presentation, that outcome of these we can plug into our impact evaluation to understand how these adoption are impacting socioeconomic and ecological aspect of that particular landscape. Along with, I would like to acknowledge a few people have been very instrumental to carry on this work forward. One thing I want to mention here, that this is one of the projects where we had a huge challenge. We could not get access to ground observation data because of IRV issues. So we had to do our own, we had made our own effort to extract ground observation data through visual interpretation of demillion presence, and which you saw here. So this is an example. If you see in this high resolution imagery, there are semicircular demi-lunes presence. So we visually interpreted these satellite data to extract those ground observations to plug into our analysis. So this is one of the examples where we have challenges, even we have fully conducted RCT but we cannot get access to the data. So thank you.
Okay, I am R.D. Garg from India. Dr. Kunwar, really very good presentation, and you have explained the demi-lune technique in a very effective manner. I just have two observations. First is you have used the Panelist data of 3-meter resolution. I think for such type of work, one can work with a moderate resolution data, 15-meter to 20-meter, or maybe slightly more. Since these data are available free of cost, and like everybody like to use this open source data for better effective working. And secondly, what you have taken is this demi-lunes. There are so many water conservation methods like check dam and all other things. With the same methodology, those also can be easily found out, their location. So I think the work can be easily extended to those.
Thank you. Thank you.
Like overall, it is a good presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. We will make sure extend this effort to those areas as well.
I was going to start by saying that I'll ask Ariel to tell me when my time is up. To the microphone is a little bit different, because I think what we have been hearing up to now is impact evaluations, I think, and then going to the spatial data. I think what I want to show you is to go from the spatial data to the impact evaluation. That means we are actually having a very bad design in terms of impact evaluation. But, at least we have a lot of data. So hopefully we can compensate for that. This is joint work with the National Technical University of Ukraine in Kiev, Natalia Kusul and Andriy Shelestov, and also with the Joint Research Center of the European Union, and I think it is supported by the EU. So let me start here. I told you we'll show you a lot of data. So what we did, and that was actually way before anybody started being interested in Ukraine, is to do a national crop mapping that we started in 2019 based on, and I think David, he's fortunately not here, but I think we have, so I think that is based on ground truth data that was collected by the local team. I think they had about 3,000 to 4,000 sample data every year. And we are getting reliability of about 95% in terms of identifying the main crops. Of course, I think Ukraine is not known as a smallholder agriculture. So definitely that is an advantage. And I think what is interesting and what you see here is that there is also open source software that I think some Czech company developed and which I think is linked to European Union standards in terms of identifying parcel boundaries. So both taking these two things together, identifying parcel boundaries based on machine learning and crop cover based on, so the map that you see here combines the two things, is a little bit cleaned up because of course there's some random pixel and noise that is there. And we have 3.3 million field boundaries. Of course, that is based both on Sentinel-1 and 2, which is radar and optical. And I think they're doing ground truthing every year. I think even last year they did that. What we wanted to use that, or what we did use that for, is to, one, account for land that is informally farmed. I think the statistics in Ukraine are terrible. There's about 11 million hectares that are missing in the statistics. And just as a comparison, the total agricultural area in Germany is 12 million hectares. So that means that essentially the entire Germany is in informality. So, and of course, land is difficult to hide. So that's why we initially approached that and said, okay, means let's look at the entire land cover, see what is public land, who cultivates that public land. I think there were a lot of very interesting cases where the government then followed up and said, okay, means look, what is happening with the public land that should actually be owned and managed by local communities. I think that will be a subject for another talk. I think we also were looking at wetlands and environmental management, because of course with water and LSWI, you can identify very easily where you should have and what is happening to your environmental or to your protected areas, which was a very big concern. And then of course, the one thing that since government interest was mentioned a lot here yesterday, I thought, I think in 2019, nobody in the government was really interested in what we were doing. By 2020, the private sector had picked up on these data because we had made them publicly available on a GeoServer. And I think by 21 and even after the war, the government came to us and bugged us and said, please, where is the crop cover map? Because everybody is asking us, because of course this is very important for the private sector, for logistics planning, to see what is going to be harvested, and I think also for local governments, because they are collecting a lot of taxes and lease fees based on the way that land is used. So clearly I think there is a lot of demand for that type of data, and it can be used in very many ways. So I think it is public. I don't want to waste time to show you. But then of course came the war. And that created a lot of different dynamics. These are Maxar data of some of the artillery shells. Artillery shells, of course, we cannot afford Maxar. We are poor people, so we have to rely on open source software, but even open source data, which is essentially Sentinel. But even with Sentinel, if you look at time series and you have a lot of students who can label these things manually, you can actually identify the field damages very easily. I think this one is, so I think the key damages, I'm not going to the occupied areas, that's why you don't see trenches here, or to the Russian side of the border, but essentially it's burning, it's movement of heavy vehicles, and it's destruction through bombs lobbing in there. I think all of this we can observe, and with a heroic effort that the National Technical University did, since the start of the war, we have bi-weekly data on the amount of crop area that is damaged directly through war impacts, using essentially, I think by now we have developed a machine learning model for that. So it's no longer completely manual, but I think initially it was all started up completely manually. Just to illustrate here, we compare the red ones are the fields that based on our methodology are damaged. The green dots is ACLED, which you may be aware of is the most used data source on conflict globally. And the white ones are the settlements. And so clearly you see ACLED pulls all of the reports to the settlements, so it's much less geographically disaggregated than our data. And of course, our data also gives you, ACLED tries to approximate the intensity of conflicts through the number of casualties, but of course that is less relevant if you talk about agriculture. So I think we think in all modesty that that is probably a more appropriate approach to look at damages through the war. Also, I think what I call is an indicator that the government publishes in terms of which villages are affected by different types of violent actions, which I think is essentially the national equivalent of ACLED data. If you compare that with our crop damage area, which we also then aggregate to the village level, you see very big differences and very little correlation. So clearly looking at the damage at the field level is something that is quite useful. And then I think on the right side, which you don't have to pay attention to, is whether that is for planting or growing, which we then use in our regressions, which I will show you in a minute. So just what we can then do, I think, is to just do very simple descriptives of what's happening to overall cultivation based on the crop maps that we have. I think what you see here, and we do this for winter crops, which is essentially cereals and rapeseed, and summer crops, which is sunflower and maize and soybean. We have, so I think what we see, this is only, the difference is only for 2023, because of course in 2022, we didn't see a lot of difference yet. So you see the, and we can, of course, the interesting thing is that since we do this at the, so we have 10,500 villages, we aggregate the field data to the village level, and of course that gives us a lot of degrees of freedom, and also we can, I mean, of course you can then disaggregate that villages close to infrastructure, far away from infrastructure, Russians not occupied by the Russians, and so on and so forth. And so I think what we do here is just to illustrate that it's that our indicator really gives you some info, contains some information. We disaggregate by the village councils that were damaged and not damaged based on our conflict indicator, where you have damaged land and not damaged land. And clearly you see very big differences here for in terms of both national and for winter crop and summer crop. But I think one thing, and I don't want to go into detail because I don't have that much time, but one thing that is interesting in this last one, the 5.73%, you see that in 2023, in villages that were not damaged, you actually have an increase in production rather than a reduction in production. So clearly it's not all doom and gloom, and that I think I will show you later. But of course, if we want to, rather than just taking descriptive statistics, we want to adjust for climate and other factors that are also quite important, because so if we do that, and I don't want to go into detail, then we can run a village level fixed effect regression with conflict indicators. And if we believe that with our climatic variables and whatever else we throw in there, we control for all the time varying effects, the time invariant effects, then of course our year indicator gives us an indication, at least an upper bound indication of the damage that is due to the macro damage inflicted by the war. And that's what we did. I think we, I don't want to show you the regression for time reasons, but at least we have then, if we have these adjusted measures, which essentially give us the impact of the war, adjusting for climatic conditions and village fixed effects. And we can disaggregate that, as I said, by village, by different types of villages. So just now, since I showed you all of that, I should probably stop and let you clap, and then we go home. So the problem is there's of course a lot of things that you cannot see through a satellite. And that's why we combine the satellite imagery with a farm survey. Doing a farm survey, I don't want to tell you all of the difficulties of doing that in an environment where nobody trusts each other. And, and that is at war, but I think so, I don't want to go into detail. Just one thing that you need to remember there is fertilizer prices increased by 150%. Which is due to the difficulty of logistics getting things into the country and the damage to infrastructure that is wrought. I think tradables, of course, diesel and machinery also increased significantly. Labor less because it's a non-tradable. And at the same time, I think yield, I mean, while we saw that there was also almost no impact in terms of production, overall land cover, there was 20% reduction in yields, 43% reduction in market participation, and about 60% in profits. I think I can show you the detailed figures that essentially output price is halved because of the difficulty of getting to market, because there are, I mean, you all know about the blockage of Odessa ports and the Danube ports as well. But at the same time, I think it's not all that bad. And interestingly, people realize that the fundamentals for agriculture are quite good. So we asked people in the farm survey whether they would be willing to, whether they wanted to sell or to buy land. I think 80% want to buy land. Rather than sell it, 3% would be willing to sell the land. So I think clearly they know that land is a very important asset And also if they want, if 85% wanted to lease more land rather than to lease less. So I think that also shows that there is some value in that. But of course, I don't want to go into detail on that. So now with the actual, now that we saw that the spatial data can be useful, let's go to programs and impact evaluation. So what the government did, of course, when the war started, there was a lot of outcry that farmers don't have the necessary resources to plant, they're cash constrained, and we need to give them some money to actually get them for the winter crop season to get planting material and so forth. I mean, of course, there's a private sector there. I think USAID had a very interesting program to actually deliver fertilizer that flopped completely. But at least giving them some money, I think, should be useful to help to do. But of course, I mean, this is a war environment, and it's an environment where there is no trust and very little data. So what we try to do is to help, or what we did is help the government establish an electronic registry of farmers that essentially can be used for farmers to get access to services, and of course also the private sector to interact with farmers and to make output and input markets more competitive. And that was used by the EU, or the EU was interested in using that for transfer, a cash transfer directly to the bank account of farmers. That was launched in August 22. That means sometime, and I think it's now used by the government for quite a number of purposes. Individuals can sign up with a digital ID, and of course that is a big advantage. And what we did is, or the only thing that we then pull all of the data that is in the official registry, both the cadastre and the registry of the land cultivated by these farmers, that allows us to link that to the parcel boundaries. And so we know how much. I think the only condition that the EU cash grant that I have here is imposed, that the farmer has to be less than 120 hectares, which is a micro farm in Ukrainian context, where the average farm size is about 2,000 hectares. It has to be in non-conflict, or the land has to be in non-conflict areas, and they get $100 per hectare that they cultivate. So of course, what we can do by linking the registry with the crop cover data, we know how much land every farmer cultivates in non-conflict areas, which allows us to check the eligibility in a day or two, and or to automate that whole thing. And then I think, so that was quite interesting. That program was launched in September. It was fully subscribed with 33,000 beneficiaries by October, and all the cash was dispersed by December. So what we can do is to use remote sensing, and since we have so I think we got, of course, this data is not exactly freely available to everybody, not even from the World Bank. So, but I think we got, since we integrated some agreements and consent through the way, through the EU program, we got parcel boundaries for 155,000 parcels cultivated both by beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries before and after the program, which of course allows us to do a panel regression to see what is happening there. And I think the nice thing is that we have non-eligible and non-eligible people. So just, I think, let me skip that. I think, and of course the estimating equation is nothing outstanding. That is just a simple panel regression where we interact the program participation with a time trend, with a time dummy, and we get the estimated effect. And of course we can then see whether there's parallel trend or not, and we can do things accordingly. So this is, if you map all of these things, all of the parcels by these farmers and what you clearly, so the yellow are the non-eligible, non-participants, the blue are the participants. And of course, a simple glance shows you that there is some issue in terms of the yellow ones where you don't see any blue dots. These are the non-eligible areas. So of course, if we include these in our comparison, we may contaminate our estimates with a conflict effect. So I think what we should do is to estimate only for the eligible ones, which are much more perfectly balanced, where at least geographically they are better balanced. So what do we get if we do the things? So I think if we do all farms, we get very significant effects, as you can see here. If we do only the eligible farms, we get a zero effect, at least for area cultivated. We don't know the NDVI we are still processing, because that is, I think we just got I was trying to speed people up, but I think, I mean, since these things are still standing in the field, I think we just got 1 week ago the summer crop estimates, which they consider reliable, I think, and the workers are quite some changes before. So I think what could be going on, or assuming that we also get a zero effect on NDVI, of course, there could be a couple of things that could underlie this. One, the remote sensing data is trash. And we are just estimating something, but of course that we can test by doing a repeat of our farmer survey, which is actually scheduled for after the harvest. Also, I think it could be that non-participating farmers got resources from elsewhere, because the government actually has a subsidized credit program where they give you free credit. So that may contaminate our estimate. Also, if, of course, there's the possibility program has no effect and needs to be improved, or that we go, and I think that relates to one of the questions, that farmers grow potatoes and blueberries. And so they go to higher value crops, which of course are also green, but which we don't really pick up with our NDVI stuff. So definitely there's some interesting methodological questions, but of course there's also very interesting potential follow-up, because having that, I think the official statistics in Ukraine, the national statistics, they tell you that there are 35,000 farmers in the entire country. We have now data for 110,000 farmers, and if we go, I mean, we can easily increase that. I think the European Union, together with the World Bank, has just capitalized the partial credit guarantee facility. The government has passed a regulation that private sector, banks and input suppliers, as well as output traders, can, with the consent of the farmer, actually access this registry data, because of course they are very interested, and the banks already came to us, especially I think the big banks, they don't need that type of thing, but of course the small guys who want to go into get into the agricultural sector, there's a lot of huge barriers of entry, because if you don't know what farmers are cultivating and where their land records are, and this data is highly confidential and super secret and whatever, then of course you don't have competition in the credit market. So I think that is something which is quite interesting, and where we can pick up on also agro-advisory services for diversification. And so I think we have, so the banks, of course, what they're interested in is to link that to both the statistical and the tax information that was submitted by farmers. And so with that, I think Ariel is standing up to remind me that my time is up. We can discuss open for questions, and I'm happy to answer anything that was unclear. Thank you.